So this is second session, the afternoon of the 15th. So this is managing external distractions, sounds, associations, while practicing detachment and remaining unperturbed. So I have the feeling that what's going on is internal distractions, am I right? So we don't have any external distractions, everything is perfect externally. You could argue that if you have pain in your body, that might be an external distraction. It could also be an internal distraction, because these things all happen in the mind, which is internal. So one is distractions or distress or disturbance that comes in through the sense perception, and then the other is something that's already inside and that during silence comes up strongly because you don't have any external distractions. So in many ways, people use external distractions to distract them from the real work that is needed and which gets drawn to our attention by internal distress or disturbances or pain. And very often physical pain is a message to tell you that there's inner work to be done, and we will increase the pain until you pay attention and do the inner work. And so in that sense, whether it's internal or external pain or distress, it's telling us something that's very important. And I think many people realize that, but then the question arises, what is it telling me? How do I find out? Because it doesn't necessarily speak English or Dutch or any language that we have verbally, but it will speak to us in its own language, and sometimes the language comes in dreams, in symbols, in images, and sometimes it's associated with an event. We are told in spiritual practice that what we are facing, what we have to deal with, is these negative emotions. And it is said that these negative emotions take the form of greed or anger or arrogance or jealousy or fear or attachment or a few others. Can't remember at the moment, but there's a ton of negative emotions that could come up. And these negative emotions, I believe they correspond very much to addictions. And one kind of addiction is substance abuse, but there are many other kinds of addictions like overworking or running or playing on your computer games or something which you do which appears innocuous but which nevertheless causes harm to you, and that you continue in spite of the fact that it causes you harm. And so harm, you have to decide what is harm and what is not harm, but there are many things that are done because of anxiety. Anxiety is a big thing. And it usually precedes some sort of addiction. And anxiety is generally a product of some kind of trauma. And trauma is something that happened to you directly or indirectly, anytime from your birth onwards, possibly even before you were born. And you can also have trauma that is carried over from another lifetime, because there are actually millions of people as we speak who are dying violent death. It's in the millions. And of course it's not advertised, because that would say too much about man's inhumanity to man, woman's inhumanity to woman, but it's there. And so that means there's lots of people who come in with trauma. And that's the condition of the world at the moment. And who gets born where, to whom, under what circumstances, is said to be a factor of karma. And so karma means action, interaction. You have some action with other people, you have some action with nature, you have some action even regarding your relationship with yourself, and you have some action regarding the divine. And all of these have consequences. And if the action is negative, then the consequences are negative. And they take the form of some sort of suffering, some kind of pain. But there are some things that happen that are not because you did something bad. They just happen for other reasons. And these are especially to do with deep learning. And why do you need to learn something deep, something important, is so that going through this ordeal makes you rise to or step up to meet it, and in so doing you acquire special qualities or special characteristics which are necessary for your destined next role. And so it's not always that these things are karma, sometimes. So when you have some of these things going on, then in the silence, as you encounter the arising of these maybe very often nameless feelings or circumstances that do not seem to be logical and that do not seem to have anything to do with something you did or failed to do. Sometimes we fail to do something we have to do, and that also counts as a negative karma. But I think that for many of you, judging by your specialities and your interest in spirituality, which has been going on for a long, long time, these things are most likely to do with raising you up to a higher state of spiritual capacity so that you can play a role that has been destined for you, but you're not quite prepared. And so it's something that prepares you. Sometimes it requires compassion. And so you need to know what is suffering so that you can have the level of compassion that is required for you at some time in the future. This is possible. Sometimes it requires resilience because the circumstances may be such that many people cannot handle it around you, but if you have resilience, you can. And this is a leadership role because it enables you to point the way forward for others, and this is a very important part in this world that one must play. And so think for a little while about the kinds of things that attack you from the inside in your thoughts and which take you away from the purposeful meditation that you intend to engage in. It can also be that you have certain mental positions or attitudes that are inevitable considering your circumstances, but which are in your way, and so they need to be transcended, set aside, and they also prevent you from being who you have to be for some higher purpose, because there are higher purposes around that need to be fulfilled. And so, you can ask yourself the question, why me? Do you sometimes ask yourself this question? Why me? Why is it that destiny has selected me for this something? And the only answer is, why not, really? Because we look at ourselves and we think, I'm not that different from anybody else, right? But yet there may be some hidden speciality that makes you particularly suitable for something that's needed, but which requires a sort of upgradation of the state of the self. And so these internal disturbances are instruments for that. And what that means is our relationship with these disturbances needs to not be antagonistic. So you must ask yourself if your relationship with your disturbance is antagonistic or not. Antagonistic means you don't like it, you fight against it, you might repress it or suppress it or oppress it or some kind of something like that. And then it comes more forcefully saying, hey, this is not the way I need to talk to you, so be friendly. And it also involves becoming very open to these distressing, disturbing, painful, mysterious inner mysteries that interfere with your normalness, and which make you feel like taking drastic decisions, which are not necessarily the right thing. This happens. There are many examples of this. So this involves getting into very positive relationship with your pain. It can be pain or it can be fear. Because sometimes when you have to rise to a certain occasion, you are afraid because it's too high for what you think you're cut out for. And so you will be afraid of it and try and avoid it and forget it and pretend it's not there. So that also happens. Because in many ways we really do not know who we are. And so these things come to, in a way, force us to look at ourselves very closely and very deeply so that we can listen to these non-verbal, mysterious messages from non-human sources, you can say. Non-human in the sense that it can come from your own future. So it's human in that it's you, but it's non-human in that it's not somebody else. And sometimes it's just destiny, which is a non-human force. And so sometimes we are called to do something. You might need to adopt, fulfill a function which requires one to be very decisive and requires leadership qualities. It requires being willing to shoulder heavy responsibility for situations, people's lives, all this. And so you need to be cool and wise and strong and these kinds of characteristics. And so pain and fear is a very interesting, important instrument to make that come about. And another part of it that's also mentioned is that you have to pass through being denigrated and not recognized and vilified and that sort of thing. So if you experience anything like that, this is also included on the menu for for what you have to rise to. Does this make sense to you? Yes? Good. And so that means you need to look at yourself differently. Very often when things go badly for people, or a lot of pain happens, or a lot of distress and unjustified, unreasonable difficulties abound, it can make you lose confidence. It can make you try and hide from the world. It can make you get depressed. It can make you have all kinds of things which are about interpreting it that you are not okay. Whereas in fact, these are messages that require you to interpret that you are very okay, more than okay. But it's not obviously that, so sometimes one doesn't do that. Because these things are painful, and we live in a world where everything is kind of described as pleasure-pain principle. If it's pleasant, it must be good. If it's unpleasant, it must be bad. And so the part of the soul which we call the intellect has been trained like that, but it needs to undo that conditioning and really learn that if it's painful, it's not necessarily bad. And if it's pleasant, it's sometimes just really quite bad. And so we have to evaluate things in terms of what happens to us when we embrace them, which means we have to start to feel good about bad things happening to us. You know, they say, why do bad things happen to good people? And they don't have an answer. You know this expression? And there are very good answers why bad things happen to good people, because the good people are needed, but they need to be upgraded in terms of hardness, resilience, extra capacities, extra compassion especially. Because if one is a good person, then logically, according to the law of karma, nothing bad would happen. And so that won't work for the divine scheme of things. So there has to be an extra clause saying, yeah, if you're really good, then really bad things will happen to you. But then really bad things happen to really bad people, and so sometimes that's confusing. And you think that if something really bad's happening to me, it probably means I'm really bad. But you know deep down in your being that you're not at all really bad, so come off it. You know how one can stay in that mentality due to not being willing to be considered arrogant or too cocky or something like that. So there's a balance involved in all these things. But at the moment, I think the thing to do in this session is really try to identify what your pain is. Because everybody has some pain somewhere about something, I think. Am I right? And it could be very deeply buried because you don't think it's important to deal with, so it gets buried. But unless it's dealt with, it will always interfere with your progress. So I think it's a very good idea to invoke your pain. Invoke it. When you sit in silence, when you do real proper yoga, as we define it in our study of Raj Yoga, that's exactly what you're doing. You're invoking your pain and you're asking it to come to the conscious mind from the subconscious. So your deep pain lives in your subconscious, and it also drives you to act in ways that are counter to your best interests. So one of the ways of identifying your pain is to see what you do, even very subtle things, what you do as a matter of course, which is actually counter to your best interests. It may be a very small thing, but it holds you back, or it doesn't allow you to blossom, or it doesn't allow you to be there and respond to the call of life. It just, you hold back. And so this is because there's something down there that needs to be dealt with. Because without that, you can't properly blossom. And sometimes it takes the form of fear. So you have to see what you are afraid of. Maybe you're afraid of being great. Maybe you're afraid of success. Maybe you're afraid of too much responsibility. I saw one film when I was on the flight about a boy from Sudan who wanted to go to Europe to have a better life as a climate and poverty refugee, and who crossed all of North Africa with great difficulty. And this was a true story that was turned into a film. And his last thing he had to do was be the pilot or the the pilot of a boat, one of the sinkable types that is used to cross the Mediterranean with 200 people in a boat made for 30. And he had to do that. And he really was afraid, unwilling. He had no clue how to drive a boat, couldn't swim, refused to take the responsibility of all these people who were in different stages of health and circumstances. But he did it. And it was a very interesting film showing how a person who really is convinced that they're nothing in particular but had a high aspiration to be free, to have a better life. And on the way, the very terrible things that happened, imprisonment, torture, this, that, starvation, so many things, having to go past lots and lots of corpses along the way, but became strong and succeeded and became who he was destined to be. But without going through these difficulties, nothing can happen, and a life would be just ordinary. But with all these difficulties, it became extraordinary. And so there is some degree of that in many people. And when a person wants to develop themselves spiritually and says, okay, let me see what happens if I go deep and go into silence and go and see what's down in the depth of the soul. And that means the person is courageous, because this is where all your monsters live. And this is where your regrets live. This is where your fears live. This is where your mistakes live. And we make many mistakes due to just not knowing, and due to inexperience, due to preconceptions, all sorts of things like this. But when you are, in a sense, destined for something important, then all of these things will take forms that carry you up and carry you forward and tell you, I will squeeze your soul until you drop whatever it is you have to drop. In terms of holding on to, sometimes holding on to what happened to you. That can be a big obstacle. And so we have to really go inside and see, okay, what is in the way and what is telling me for our half hour after this. Really try to find out what is your obstacle, what is your pain, what is your fear, what is your something. It may not be in those categories, it may be a different category, but there will be something down there that is not allowing you to step up. So, how should one go about doing that? So that the silence that we practice, based on going deep into thoughts, which are very focused, very connected with each other. You have very specific themes to think about, as I was telling you this morning about this stream of pure thoughts, right? So you create streams of pure thoughts which are very connected with each other, very not random, but very connected and associated, and that they follow one from the other. Because this allows you to cultivate a logical thinking, which is sometimes paradoxical, but it takes you in a mental movement that resembles a drill, because you have to go round and round and deep and make a deep hole in your soul to open up the gates of your subconscious. But your direction of your thought is up, and the gates that it opens are down. It works like that. And so when going up, you're using very pure positive thoughts that are taking you into a connection with the divine source, with the Supreme Soul. And so it creates ultimately a shaft of light between yourself and that, because you're concentrated. You know, there is, in yogis always have a flame above their head that's invisible. Have you got one? Make one. Imagine one. But when you're focused above, beyond, it creates that. The flame is a symbol of the soul. And so when the soul is still and steady, it creates this, what clairvoyants will see, big flame on top of your head. And you may become very sensitive on top of your head. Are you sensitive on top of your head? So that means there's a flame sitting there that you don't know about. But there is. And you need to sustain it, make it strong. Because it becomes like this laser beam that goes up. And this allows this energy to come down through you and just go to your subconscious and open the gate. Otherwise you can't open the gate just like that. You want to open the gate and then allow what is there to present itself to you. Because this is what you have to deal with. And as long as it's hidden, it's driving you, but you can't access it. So you can't do anything about it. But when you do this, you open up the gates and it has to come out, because it's a bit of a monster which always comes out if the gates are open, right? And so then you have to see, this is what they call in Asia, embrace the tiger. Have you heard about doing that? So this is your tiger coming out to snarl at you and maybe have you for lunch. But you will take a hold of this tiger and say, okay, we need to talk. And so the practice is to be still and focused, and your stream of pure thoughts causes that. And then you can arrive at a still place where your stream of thoughts has taken you to this destination of quiet stillness. And that's when the energy then goes down, opens up your gates, and then not that day, but the next day or the next day after that, that's when the monsters come out. Hope that's okay. So you have really beautiful, beautiful meditation experiences followed by all hell breaking loose. And then people think, oh, this is not right. It's not supposed to be like this, but in fact it is. So it comes, and then you have an opportunity to identify it. When it's intangible, being hidden, it's too impossible to say to yourself what this is. it will come as disturbance, it will come as pain, and so your immediate first reaction is to try and stuff it back into the genie's bottle, because it escaped. You want to stuff it back in because it's kind of out of control. But no, that's not necessary. You want it to come out. You want to see it. You want to hear what it has to say. And so it won't speak to you like a person speaks to you, but it will speak to you in feelings. And so you must observe what you're feeling. And it may be a multitude of feelings, of different varieties of discomfort. And some of them may be more strong, some of them may be more insidious, some of them may be very difficult to grasp, but they're there, and so sit with them with the intention that they should reveal themselves to you, because you want to know, what is this? And the first and most important thing is to kind of open yourself up so that there is a big space. Because if you have a big storm in a small teacup, it doesn't fit too well. So you have to make a big bathtub, at least, of your soul to hold this disturbance and try to be still, though it is not still. But you be still, it is not still, and you look at it and you feel it, and you're trying to see, now what is this? And what does this mean? What is this trying to tell me? And you talk to it as if it is like a person, even though it isn't. But you know, in myths and religions and so on, they have a tendency to personify evil, right? The devil has, horns and big red tail and all this stuff. And so this personification is actually a mechanism for, talking to these things. But when they personify it in religion, it's always for thinking it's really bad and has to be stomped down. But this, no. You personify it as, okay, pain, distress, you're here to tell me something, I'm listening. I want to know what you have to say. I need to understand, so we got to talk. And when you do that, and you continue to sit with it and be with it, then it will let you know through some kind of thought that is not your thought, but a thought comes to you, and you will say, okay, I take this as a thought that is a response to my inquiry. It can sometimes come as an image, which can let you have access to what might have been some trauma that caused this inner wound in the first place. So you see the origin of it, then you understand it, and you understand if it made a distortion in your soul, because trauma will distort the soul. And sometimes, especially in a warlike situation, the trauma takes the form of vengeance. And then you're driven by vengeance, which means there's escalation of negative karma. And that doesn't really get you anywhere, except it's more painful. So you want to unravel it and say, okay, so be it. Whatever it is, you say, I'm quite willing to understand it, however good, bad, or indifferent it is, or however really bad it is, it's okay. I want to know, what is this? So that I can become neutral about it. You see. Neutrality is very important, because when you're neutral about it, you're not against it. When you're not against it, you work with it. And working with it enables you to have integration of an otherwise fragmented or disintegrated soul, you see. Not that a soul can be disintegrated, but it feels like that. Do you see what I'm saying? And it might take some time to really get full clarity, so it has to be done incrementally. And in these days that we're doing this work, you may get a little bit, or you may get one small monster or a couple of little monsters. Maybe bigger ones are coming later on, that's okay. You need skill in monster bashing. So you work with it little by little until you see the fullness of it. And when you get the totality of it, then you have acquired your complete freedom. And this is very, very worth having. And you do it little by little. But it is achieved through understanding pain and distress, upset, injustice, all sorts of things that morality labels as bad and to be avoided at all costs, but which spirituality says not necessarily bad, definitely not to be avoided, must be faced, must be accessed, must be embraced and included, because the soul is made of light and dark. We always say light, but along with light there has to be dark. It's like that. So in that way, when you are neutral about the light and the dark, then you have the whole totality. And this is actually the meaning of the symbol of the swastika. You know the swastika, right? So it's usually associated with something very unpleasant, but it's actually a very ancient symbol referring to this work of bringing together the light and the dark so that you are fully an integrated person who is at ease with your shadow as well as your brilliance. This is very important work. Is it okay? So I basically completed what I had to say, so I think that we could start the meditation now. You can even keep your notebooks with you if you get a moment of insight that you want to write. That's not bad to do that. And keep your attention on building your stream of very pure thoughts, because this is the beginning. Very, very pure thoughts. But because I told you all the secrets, you know that it leads to its opposite. And so you can also invoke the dark side. That's okay. And nothing will happen that is too much for you, that's guaranteed, because there's a safety mechanism fixed inside, so no problem.